The wind whispered through the tall, dry grass as young Sarah stood beside Jed. His horse, Old Scout, stamped a hoof impatiently, ready to go. Jed was a cowboy, strong and kind, and Sarah loved him with all her heart. They held hands tightly, their fingers laced together like strong vines. "I'll be back, Sarah," Jed said, his voice soft but sure, like the gentle rustle of leaves. "Before the last snow melts and the spring flowers bloom, I just need to ride west, find a good piece of land for my cattle. A place where they can grow fat and happy, a home for us." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears she tried hard to hold back. She nodded, trusting his every word. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a warm promise in his touch. "Wait for me," he whispered again, then climbed onto Scout. With one last, loving look, he rode away, heading towards the setting sun. Sarah stood alone, watching until he was just a tiny speck on the big, open land. The promise of spring felt very far away, but her heart held onto it like a precious treasure. The cold, biting wind slowly gave way to warmer breezes. The last patches of snow melted into sparkling streams, and tiny green shoots pushed up from the brown earth. Spring had arrived, just as Jed had promised. Wildflowers, yellow and blue and purple, dotted the open fields like a painter's cheerful brushstrokes. But Jed did not come. Each morning, Sarah woke with a flutter of hope in her chest. She would finish her chores quickly, then sit by the small window in her cabin. Her eyes would scan the horizon, searching for a familiar rider and his horse. Every shadow, every distant sound, made her heart beat a little faster. She spent hours in her small garden, digging and planting, making the ground beautiful, just in case he rode up that very day. She imagined him seeing the bright flowers, a welcome home. The sun would set, painting the sky in fiery colors, and still, no Jed. Sarah would sigh, a soft, quiet sound, and tell herself, maybe tomorrow. Her hope, like a tiny seed, stayed planted deep inside her, waiting for its own spring to bloom. The maybes turned into months, and the months stretched into years. The little garden Sarah tended with such care grew bigger, then smaller, then bigger again with each passing season. The cabin, once filled with the ghost of Jed's laughter, became a quiet place where only Sarah's own footsteps echoed. She learned to do everything herself. She chopped wood with a strong swing of the axe, fixed leaky roofs with steady hands, and hunted small game for food. Her soft hands grew calloused, her back strong from endless work. The image of Jed, once so clear in her mind, began to blur a little around the edges, like an old photograph faded by the sun. The hope she had held so tightly started to feel like a very old, very fragile dream. Sometimes, when the wind howled outside, she would catch herself listening for a horse, but then she would shake her head. It was just the wind. Jed's promise, once a bright star, was now more like a distant flicker, barely seen in the vast, lonely night. The years that slowly stole her hope also forged something new in Sarah. The young woman who once waited by the window had vanished, replaced by a strong frontier woman, tough as the oak trees surrounding her cabin. Her hands, once soft, were now firm and knowing, skilled at many tasks. When the wooden fence around her small yard broke, she didn't wait for help. She found new planks, hammered them into place, and tied them tight with wire. When winter winds screamed and ice covered the ground, she would grab her axe. Thwack! Thwack! Her strong arms chopped logs, splitting them into neat piles of firewood, enough to keep her cabin warm through the coldest nights. She faced the blizzards alone, the silence of the snowy landscape broken only by the crackle of her fire and the soft breathing of her old dog, Duke. She learned to rely only on herself, her spirit as unyielding as the frozen earth. She was no longer just waiting. She was living, surviving, and thriving, all by herself. With each fence post she mended and every log she split, the memory of Jed's promise grew fainter. It wasn't that she forgot him entirely, but the bright, hopeful words he'd spoken so long ago had settled into a quiet corner of her mind, like an old, dusty book on a high shelf. She hardly ever pulled it down to read it anymore. Sarah was too busy living. Her days were filled with the real, pressing needs of the frontier. Milking her cow, mending clothes, preparing meals, and keeping her small home safe from the wild. She had learned to find joy in the simple things, The warmth of her fire, the taste of fresh berries, the loyal company of Duke, her old dog. The independent life she had built for herself was not the one she had dreamed of with Jed, but it was her life. It was strong and steady, shaped by her own hands and her own courage. The thought of a cowboy returning in spring no longer stirred her heart. It was a tale from a past that felt very, very far away. The seasons kept turning, year after year, until the frontier had etched 20 long winters onto the landscape and onto Sarah's face. Her hair, once a warm brown, now held streaks of silver like threads of moonlight. Her hands, though still strong, showed the story of countless tasks and hard work. She was no longer just a strong woman. She was older, much wiser, with eyes that had seen much and understood even more. On this particular night, the cold outside was sharp and biting, making the cabin creak and groan. Sarah sat by her crackling fire, the flames dancing and casting warm shadows on the walls. Her old dog, Duke, now with a frosted muzzle, lay curled at her feet, snoring softly. The wind howled like a lonely wolf, pushing against the sturdy logs of her home. Sarah sipped her hot tea, watching the embers glow, thinking of nothing much at all, just enjoying the quiet warmth after another long, hard-working day. The world outside was frozen still, and inside, Sarah felt a deep, peaceful calm. The only sounds in the cabin were the soft crackle of the fire and Duke's gentle snores. Then, a new sound, sharp and clear, cut through the quiet night. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythmic thud. Thud, thud. That was soft at first, then a little louder. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Duke, who had been fast asleep, lifted his head and let out a low, questioning growl. His ears twitched, listening. The sound grew clearer. The slow, heavy steps of a horse, walking through the deep snow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each step was slow, careful, as if the animal was very tired. It was coming from the direction of the old trail, the one that led to her cabin. For a moment, Sarah didn't move. Her mind, so used to the silence of her own world, tried to make sense of it. Who would be out on such a cold, dark night? And why were they coming here? The steps kept coming, closer and closer, until they seemed to be right outside her door. Sarah's heart gave a sudden, hard jump, like a startled rabbit. It was a feeling she hadn't known in years, a mix of fear and something she couldn't name. Her old dog, Duke, stood up, his low growl turning into a soft whine, looking at the door. Slowly, Sarah rose from her chair, her movements stiff as she walked towards the heavy wooden door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the latch. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open just a crack, letting a gust of icy air rush into the warm cabin. Standing there, covered in a fine layer of snow, was a horse. It was tired, its head bowed, and on its back sat a man. He was older, much older, with lines carved deep into his face like a map of hard journeys. His beard was frosted with white, and his hat was pulled low. But as he slowly lifted his head, his eyes met hers. In those eyes, despite the years and the harshness of the world, Sarah saw a spark, a color she knew. A wave of 20 forgotten springs and winters crashed over her. It was Jed. He had returned. The icy wind swirled around them, but neither Sarah nor Jed seemed to feel the cold. They just stared, their eyes locked, saying nothing. 20 years of silence stretched between them, thick as the falling snow. Sarah saw the young cowboy she'd loved, now hidden beneath a lifetime of sun and wind and worry. Jed saw the bright-eyed girl he'd left, now a woman strong and silvered, a stranger and yet deeply familiar. Finally, Jed broke the long silence. His voice was rough, like stones tumbling down a hill, much deeper than Sarah remembered. Sarah, he began, his breath puffing out in white clouds in the cold air. I got lost. Lost in the mountains. Way out west. He paused, looking away for a moment, then back at her. A bad storm hit, worse than any I'd ever seen. My horse, old Scout, got hurt. I couldn't leave him. Then I was found by a family deep in a hidden valley. They nursed Scout back to health, and me too. But the snows came, trapping us in. Years passed, one after another, and each spring I tried to leave. But something always held me back. Sickness, another storm, a broken wagon wheel. It felt like the world was holding me prisoner. He looked at his hands, calloused and worn. But I never stopped thinking of you. Never forgot my promise. As soon as I truly could, I started riding. It was a long, hard journey, through deserts and over mountains, but I kept coming. All this time, I was coming back to you. Quote, Sarah listened to Jed's story, her face unmoving in the cold night air. Inside her, a whirlwind of feelings began to stir. There was the shock of his sudden return, a surprise so deep it felt like a dream. Then, a tiny spark of anger, hot and sharp, for all the lonely years, for all the waiting and wondering, for the hope that had dried up inside her. But beneath it all, deeper and older than anything else, was a warmth she thought had died. It was the familiar pull of a love she had once cherished, a love that had never truly left, only slept. Her eyes, which had been hard and steady for so long, softened just a little. She looked at his tired face, the lines of hardship, the way his shoulders slumped with weariness. The anger lessened, making way for something else. Come inside, Jed, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Not a question, but an invitation. It's too cold to stand out here. Quote, with a grateful nod, Jed slowly dismounted from his horse, his movements stiff with cold and long travel. Old Scout, the horse, lowered his head and let out a soft sigh of relief. Sarah watched as Jed led the horse to the small lean-to beside her cabin, where he quickly covered him with a thick blanket. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to shake off some of the past, Jed turned and walked towards the open door of Sarah's cabin. He stepped across the threshold, leaving the biting winter night behind and entering the warm, fire-lit room. The smell of burning wood and brewing tea filled the air, a comfort he hadn't known in decades. He looked around the familiar yet changed space, then back at Sarah, who stood by the fireplace, her face soft in the glow. The long, silent wait was finally over. The 20 empty springs and endless winters had brought him back. What would happen next, neither of them knew. It was a new start, a fresh chapter, filled with questions and the quiet hope of what might be, unsure but ready to begin.